The Last of Us Part 3, one of my most anticipated, and I'm sure one of your guys' most anticipated games that is coming up in the far future, alongside Red Dead Redemption 3, Elder Scrolls 6 and GTA 6. Last year it seemed that the game was in early production, and by early production I read a rumor that Neil Druckmann had the outline for the story written on a napkin, and now recent rumors suggest that in Naughty Dog Studios that The Last of Us Part 3 is in development stage. And by development stage I mean that it's in the whiteboarding stage, so like the crew members of the studio are in a room putting down stuff on pieces of paper, brainstorming ideas on a whiteboard to see what will happen in The Last of Us Part 3, what game mechanics, what could they improve. All that kind of stuff is seemingly happening right now. So when we talk about the release of The Last of Us Part 3, we got to look at Last of Us Factions, which I don't know if it's coming next year, but we know that Neil Druckmann said last year at the Summer Game Fest, Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Fest, that we're going to get more information of The Last of Us Factions. And Neil Druckmann is heavily behind, and I think he's directed some episodes, but he's definitely a producer. He's like majority of the time on set of the new Last of Us TV show, which is going to air in January, and hopefully I'm very excited for that. And we've got to assume that if a second season, third season is going to get greenlit, and if they're going to follow the story of Last of Us Part 2, or if they're not, if they're going to stray from that story as well, whether they follow the story of The Last of Us Part 2 for season 2 or they stray from it, Neil Druckmann will definitely be behind that show. So that's a lot of time taken up by Last of Us Factions and The Last of Us show. Then we've got the new IP, which I'm pretty sure Neil Druckmann is behind as well, and Uncharted 5, which is, it seems like that's going to be handled by a different team. So these are all of the Naughty Dog things, and maybe I'll do a video separate going into more detail and just giving some of my thoughts about these things. But all of these factor into when The Last of Us Part 3 will get its release, and just some early speculation, I think it's going to be in the ballpark of about 2026, 2027, maybe even later, maybe when we're really in to the end segment of the generation of PlayStation 5, or maybe we'll get pro consoles, which I watched some Digital Foundry videos and they're saying that we most likely won't be getting pro consoles because there's no need to have pro consoles because the potential of PS5 hasn't even been touched yet. And I thought it would be interesting to discuss why The Last of Us Part 3 should go in the direction of being an open world game. In Uncharted 4, there were open-ended missions. There were like these explorable sections, which were absolutely beautiful. And these open-ended sections seemed like they could tease a future open-world game. Then we got The Last of Us Part 2, and I heard rumors as well about Neil Druckmann wanting to make The Last of Us Part 2 an open-world game. I mean, it was a lot of the levels were very open compared to The Last of Us Part 1 because of the technical prowess of the PlayStation 4. And now that we've got the PlayStation 5, maybe this is the time. Maybe we have the power to make The Last of Us Part 3 an open world game that is on the quality and has the absolute insane attention to detail that The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 especially have. Another interesting rumor I saw was Days Gone being a kind of test project for a Last of Us open world game. I mean, if you look at Days Gone, the UI is very similar to The Last of Us. The kind of tone of the game is very similar to The Last of Us, and you know, it's an apocalypse, it's a zombies world. So there's a lot of similarities between Days Gone and The Last of Us. So maybe it wasn't, obviously it's by Sony Bend Studio, it's a very separate studio, but maybe it was kind of to see the success of what Days Gone would have, and whether this, if it was as successful as the Last of Us series, that maybe the Last of Us series should go open world. I don't think that's the case. I think even if the Last of Us goes open world right now, you don't really need Days Gone to help decide the fact that this game, this series, should go open world. I mean, it's completely separate franchises. If anything, Days Gone needs The Last of Us to see whether that should have been a linear game, which maybe it should have. I mean, I love Days Gone. I think it's one of my favorite exclusive PlayStation games. It had its problems, but it also had a lot of strengths, and I really wanted a sequel for Days Gone. And maybe I think there's an upcoming Days Gone movie. I think I heard that. If that's a right rumor, if that's correct, then I would be very excited for a Days Gone movie, and I would love Sam Witwer to replay his role as Deacon St. John in that movie. There's a YouTuber that goes by Marcel Lewis who had a brilliant Last of Us Part 3 video. I'll leave it linked in the description. And one of the things he said that I thought was very interesting and I wanted to discuss was that The Last of Us Part 3, if it does go open world, it should take some inspiration from Metal Gear Solid 5 system. Now, if you've played Metal Gear Solid 5, before missions, before episodes, you would have to pick a loadout, and you can customize the loadout to however you want to play that mission. And I think that's very, very intriguing for the future of The Last of Us. I mean, one of the things that I had not really a problem, well, I did have a problem with it after the early stages of the game, you know, it was the scavenging. You know, you keep going around, you go into drawers, you keep having to pick up these gears and these little things, which the attention to detail again in The Last of Us is incredible, that you have to pick up these little gears and then upgrade your weapons and ammo and stuff like that. Some people just don't want to play like that. And when I played The Last of Us Part 1, you still have to do, it's the same kind of system within The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2. But after I played The Last of Us Part 1 remake again, I saw that the option for infinite ammo, and I replayed it, New Game Plus, straight away there and then, skipping the cutscenes except for, you know, a couple that you just want to see again over and over. You'll never get bored of them. But playing on infinite ammo, it's just like a different kind of experience. It's you know, you don't have to worry about losing ammo, or, you know, you don't have to worry about upgrading so much and crafting ammo and all this kind of stuff. It's just, you know, it's run and gun, and I love playing that. I don't love playing like that all the time, but I love having the option to play like that, and having the both walkthroughs of The Last of Us Part 1. Of course, scavenging, it does bring something to the game. It's the atmosphere, it's the kind of survival thing, which is great, and I think you can kind of combine both in an open world game. There's going to be sections where you can have both, where you can, if you've got a horse or motorbike, kind of like Red Dead Redemption, you can store ammo on the horse or something like that. In Days Gone, you can store ammo in the bike, but if you leave the bike and you go straight too far, maybe you'll run out of ammo, then you kind of have to go stealth mode. There's options to get around both. But Marcel Lewis's video, and he talked about this Metal Gear Solid kind of pre-loadout option that they could, this pre-loadout approach that they could have in The Last of Us Part 3, which I think it could work, and I think it would be very cool for Ellie, Tommy, Abby, whoever you're going to play as, to maybe go back to base after certain missions, which could be the Jackson base or after the Last of Us factory. Well, I'll get into all that. So now, whether they take this approach for Metal Gear Solid, if they are assuming to go open world, I think one of the key things is allowing the player to play any way they want. I mean, you've got prone for stealth. There's certain mechanics in the game. There's so much beauty, because when you're playing just stealth, and the gore of this game is incredible, I kind of want to play run and gun when I want to see that incredible gore, and I want to really dissect my opponents. I really want to blow them up. I want all of them to come at me. I want to lay bombs all over the place, and I want to do this repetitively for different, maybe little side quests around the open world. The Last of Us Part 2 and Part 1 had amazing gore, especially with the remake, and even the original Last of Us Part 1, it had amazing gore. So now I think giving the player an option to play run and gun stealth, whether they want to do a hybrid of both, which I think ends up being me in a lot of situations, especially when you get caught and stuff. I think allowing the player to play anywhere they want would be very, very cool for the next Last of Us game, especially if it does go open world and you're pre-mission and you choose your kind of loadout on your horse, or whether you get a motorbike, or if you have to go back to base and return to base and stuff. Obviously we have to think about pacing when it comes to that kind of stuff, so whatever they decide with that. Now when we come onto side missions and stuff, I think we're gonna have to go into the Last of Us factions. Now when we do get our hands on Last of Us factions, whatever factions they establish in that game, I think will come into the Last of Us Part 3. So we're gonna establish some in the Last of Us faction, they're gonna cross over into the Last of Us Part 3, you know, to overly expand the Last of Us universe, and I think that's great. And I think certain factions, of course, won't like other factions. So in this open world, theoretical open world Last of Us Part 3, you're going to have to decide who you want to link with, who you want to be a part of. And I think there should obviously be pros and cons with each faction. Maybe you get better horses or traversal vehicles and stuff with one faction if you go along with them, and better weapons with another, and maybe better something else like equipment gear with another faction. And I think there should be like starter missions for each one, so you get a little bit of a taste of each faction, but then you ultimately have to decide who you want to go through within that first playthrough, which does give the game replayability, because maybe the second playthrough you want to play more stealth approach and you also want to go along with this different faction. Now the missions don't always have to be open-ended. I think some of the magic, of course the magic with The Last of Us is the scripted linear missions, and I think you can definitely bring that to the main story of The Last of Us. Definitely. I mean, that's ultimately what I want from The Last of Us Part 3, is this very close, personal, emotional story that is told like a movie or like a TV show. And I think you don't have to get rid of that when you go within an open world. If we play the Red Dead Redemption 2, The Witcher 3, you can see how amazing these stories are, and I think if Naughty Dog do this approach, it would be something very, very special. They are the best storytellers in the business, and that the open world doesn't have to be a crutch for them. It could actually be an enhancement to what The Last of Us Part 3 could be. Now, how big should The Last of Us Part 3's open world map be? I personally think it should take from The Witcher 3's approach, where it's kind of big, open-ended, separated maps. Now you have Tucson, Velen, Novigrad, Skellige. They're all big maps, and some of them are obviously bigger than others, and they all have their kind of style. And I think that would be very, very cool to see in The Last of Us Part 3, and also leave room for DLC, expansions, different maps, different areas. And I think that would be very, very cool for The Last of Us Part 3 to explore different open world maps that have their own atmosphere, own styles. One map is very, very, scary and hard, and you don't really feel comfortable being there. I think that would be very, very cool for The Last of Us Part 3 to explore. I would also love, of course, a large range of weapons. That's one of my things, when I go through playing The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2, I just wish there was more assault rifle. You only get one assault rifle at the end of the game in the last mission, then you can do New Game Plus to use the assault rifle, but you can't upgrade that assault rifle, unfortunately, in both games. I think I did try in both games, but you couldn't upgrade it. So I think, just having a large, varied palette of weapons at your disposal, which again, if we do this Metal Gear Solid approach, or it's not necessarily a Metal Gear Solid approach, a lot of games do have this loadout function, but just having a large amount of weapons at your disposal, available to upgrade. And if you have these different factions, you get different upgrade slots, different upgrade available options depending on which one you've sided with. I think would be very, very, very incredible to explore, and just give the game replayability, and playing the games over and over again. One of my favorite things about The Last of Us and the Uncharted games, which I think more games need to explore, is the encounters section on the main menu, where you can just replay encounters over and over again and just do them in various different ways. That's one of the things I would love, is to be able to, it's kind of repetitive. It is repetitive, not kind of repetitive. It is repetitive, but when the gameplay is that good as The Last of Us, when the weapons, they feel incredible, and the combat, the AI, and all of these things are synced and they just feel amazing, I just don't mind. I could play it over and over. I mean, I have played them over and over again. And if you've got an open world with different, a great example would be Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which kind of has generated enemies. I'm sure they're generated when they just appear on the map out of nowhere when you're flying over them. I would love that for the next Last of Us game, to just have unlimited kind of enemies that appear. And some sections are harder, some bases are harder. Clear out these enemy bases, get some reward, but then they kind of respawn if you don't tend to them, or if you're not really capturing them, like in Far Cry. All of these aspects can be implemented in the next, if the next Last of Us game goes open world. All of them can be implemented and just be incredible. I mean, it's all about the gameplay here, really, for me. In terms of what characters are you going to play as, if you go into the narrative, of course, Ellie. If we go back to Abby, I think their story would be very interesting to tell, but also really, really, really want to play as Tommy in the next game. I think Tommy has so much potential, especially how The Last of Us Part 2 ended. I think we definitely need a story arc, a very deep emotional story arc to play as Tommy. I don't want to play as Lev. I don't want to play as a kid. I seriously don't want to play as Lev. I don't want to play as JJ either. If they do a time jump, I don't want to play as JJ. I think Abby, Ellie, even Abby, I'm not really... Her gameplay was great. I think her melee stuff was great. But playing as Tommy is the big one. And Ellie, of course, I do want to play as Ellie. And I also think maybe... I don't know if this is too much to ask. I think all of this may be too much to ask. But maybe playing certain missions... Or certain missions you do have to play as one character, of course. But maybe, for side missions you can either play as Tommy, Ellie, or Abby, or whoever else they have as options to play as. And it's kind of like GTA, or in the pre-loadout section, or if you go back to base and you can change who you want to be. But it really depends, of course, how the story is structured and who's going to be available during the game and end game and stuff like that. I also think each character should have a slightly different style. Abby is more melee focused because of her brutality and brute force and nature. Ellie is kind of the all-rounder, more nimble, can do stealth a lot better. But Tommy is that kind of long range. I mean, we've seen him with the sniper, that's what I'm saying, long range really. But he wouldn't really... I think he should be, again, melee focused. I really want Tommy to beat the absolute living hell out of people. But Tommy being more of a gun-focused connoisseur character would make sense to me anyway. And also, I think there should be a high, deep level of customization in this game. They kind of teased it now with the skins in The Last of Us Part 2, Part 1 Remake, and Uncharted 4 Legacy of Thieves Collection. I mean, they've had skins, I think, in all of these Last of Us games and Uncharted games, but going into the next one, I think a deep level of customization in terms of clothes, just normal clothing, not really armor. I'm just talking about just like wearing a t-shirt, maybe finding one in an abandoned mall and stuff like that. Those kind of cool places that have been abandoned, like a theater, which we did get in Last of Us Part 2, which I really loved. And it's kind of the reason why I wanted to be more like open world, like how Red Dead Redemption 2, where you can go into theaters and cinemas and all these kind of places. I think Last of Us Part 3, we should be able to explore malls, get some clothes, weapons, kind of like that kind of stuff, find weapons, find armor pieces, and it kind of reflects on your clothing. And I think that's one of the cool things that they could do is if you're wearing a helmet, it has kind of points, it will protect you. And then whether you're not wearing a helmet, it's not just kind of a cosmetic thing where I think the clothing should be a cosmetic. Oh my god, I'm jumbling my words. I think the clothing should be a cosmetic thing, and then you have armor pieces on top, and then you'll be able to also find weapons that you may not necessarily find during the story. So you can have like different pistols due to side missions and stuff that are kind of locked behind faction missions, and also incredible like places that you can explore in the open world. Maybe you find a dead soldier and you find his lucky Magnum rifle that's very similar to Rick Grimes' rifle, you know, kind of like a little Easter egg kind of things. And I think this should be in a structure that is like Red Dead Redemption 2 rather than being an RPG kind of game. I don't really want this to be RPG. I want it to feel more like how Red Dead Redemption felt, where there's kind of no like stats on clothing and stuff like that. No. I just want it to be a kind of like realistic Red Dead approach to how these things are handled. Now, do I think any of this is going to happen in terms of Last of Us Part 3 being open world? If I was a betting man, I would say no. I don't think The Last of Us Part 3 is going to be open world, unfortunately, but also not unfortunately, because they just make incredible, insane linear narrative games. So whatever approach they do, as long as it's incredible, I'd enjoy it. Like, I wouldn't be upset if it's not open world, but I would really love to see an open world Last of Us game. And I think if it's not done in The Last of Us Part 3, I think, of course, a sequel to that game, not Last of Us Part 4 necessarily. I think The Last of Us Part 3 should be the end of Ellie's story, and the next Last of Us game, which I think would be a spin-off, not Last of Us Factions, but like the next Last of Us narrative-based single-player game, should be a kind of separate story now, like a different character. And I think Last of Us Part 3 should be the end of Ellie, and her storyline, and should end happy and hopeful, which I'm hoping for. But I'll hopefully make a different video about that. And I'd also love, I think a lot of people would love, I've seen videos about it, that maybe they should do, I mean, I've seen videos that say The Last of Us Part 3 should be a prequel game. Now, I do think they should explore a prequel game, and if they do explore this prequel game, I think it should be open world. And I think if it's Tommy and Joel, it would be amazing, incredible. As I've heard from their stories that they moved around a lot, so we could actually be moving around a lot in an open world game, different sections, different factions. They're kind of, I'm sure they were kind of like drifter kind of guys in their past life, and we can explore why Tommy was kind of kind of afraid of Joel, and kind of more haunted by what Joel did in his past and mortified by his actions. So, but I would love to hear your thoughts about what The Last of Us Part 3 should be, what this open world game should be, should it be open world, and what kind of features you want to see from an open world game. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Peace out, God bless, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Take care, guys.